You're watching TVC Breakfast. Unemployment in Nigeria has been on the increase over the years.
Youth in Kano State, northwest Nigeria, recently gathered to proffer solutions to the issue. TVC News correspondent Ibrahim Isa has details.
They are young, and most of them are graduates from different higher institutions in various disciplines. Rising unemployment has brought them together to discuss possible ways to overcome the situation. One of the suggestions made is changing the mindset of youth to become entrepreneurs, learning various trades for their growth. Through music performances and fashion carnivals, these youth are winning the hearts of their counterparts.
We have a lot of graduates and no job, so we decided to initiate a group, an organization that will help the youths. So creating an organization without organizing programs like this will not help the matters.
It is like a business boot camp in order for the entrepreneurs to learn what is business, how to run their business, to know their vision and mission in a business, to know the strategy steps in which to take out their plans.
From photography to makeup for the ladies to fashion designs, these young people are picking up skills to tackle Nigeria's fundamental challenge.
We found Northerners, we believe that government will provide jobs for us, but unfortunately there are no more jobs in Nigeria. So we think that our youths are left behind. Those that we have been doing our own business, we come together so that we can create this association so that we can help our upcoming youths.
Well, I've learned how to collaborate with other people, other entrepreneurs from other sectors, apart from my own, to come together and build something beautiful.
I can mentor youths that are that are aspiring to be entrepreneurs. I'm into getting I own a popcorn business.
Nigeria's development index is relatively low due to the high unemployment rate. According to the International Labour Organization, ILO, unemployment is amongst the biggest threats to social stability in many countries, and Nigeria is included. In 2012, the global rate, according to the organization, stood at 12.6%. These youth are hopeful that sooner or later there will no longer be a high demand for white-collar jobs, as graduates will be engaged in businesses for their personal and societal growth. Ibrahim Isa, TVC News, Kano.
We have in the studio managing editor, the Avalon Daily, Ayodele Adio. Ayodele, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to see you.
Thank you for having
Great.
me.
Now, unemployment in Nigeria, when it comes to the phenomenon called unemployment, I guess is as popular as the name Nigeria, because it is one social issue or one social challenge that we have been studying and learning even from primary school and all of that up until now. But here we are right now. Government after government, regime after regime, administration after administration have put one strategy, one scheme on for employment or against unemployment after the other. But yet the numbers keep rising. What's the challenge here?
I'm glad you called it a phenomenon, because we've been unable to reduce poverty for over 4 decades now. It's been on an upward trajectory for the past 30, 40 years, and it's become extremely worse now when you have people between the ages of 15 and 35 having 54% poverty rates in the country. That's an alarming number. I think a couple of factors have plunged us into this quagmire that we're in. One of them is a lack of coordinated efforts between the federal governments, state governments, and local governments to tackle poverty. So there is this idea that it's the job of Abuja strictly to deal with poverty, and then state governors simply go to sleep. So if you look at the poverty rates per state in the country, you'll be shocked that certain oil-rich states even have the highest rates of poverty in their high rate of unemployment in their states. So when you look at that kind of contradiction, you understand that first, throwing money, first of all, that you are an oil-rich state does not necessarily translate to dealing with unemployment in your state. And two, throwing money at the problem does not necessarily solve poverty or unemployment. So first, there has to be coordination between the federal government and state governments to follow through with policy propositions You see, the problem we usually have is that we have all of these fancy documents on paper.
Absolutely.
But the ability
paper,
to follow through,
paper,
the
all sorts of
discipline,
paper.
yes, the discipline to follow through is usually a problem for us. And that is where the problem is. The ability to have competent bureaucrats in the institutions that are supposed to drive these policies is a huge challenge for us. So our institutions are filled, of course, there are competent people in certain bureaucracies, but the amount of competent people are questionable. And so there's a lack of discipline in driving. So, I mean, we set up an ERGP plan that was supposed to be driven by the Vice President and the Economic Management team. It was supposed to be a 4 or 5 year plan. And shockingly, none of the objectives were, I mean, a few of the objectives were met. Like, we got a few numbers down, the ease of doing business. We improved on that. But in terms of economic growth,
but we kept
unemployment,
going up and down.
Exactly. So what did we do after 3 years? We bundled the plan, threw it in a garbage bag, and then we've launched another plan again. So this lack of consistency and this lack of discipline to follow through has plunged us into the situation where we keep recycling unemployment and poverty, and the people are there suffering. So what needs to happen is that first there has to be coordination from the federal government to state governments to create jobs. And to do that, the state and federal government need to go with state-led policies that create enabling environment for the private sector to thrive, and at the same time creating social interventions that support low-income people to make sure that this thing, and of course, one other important thing is stimulus. You cannot drive unemployment without the growth of businesses. And when businesses cannot access credit, or when it's difficult to access credit, or when the cost of credit is high, businesses will find it difficult to expand. So when interest rates are between 23, 25, 28%, businesses cannot borrow to expand. And if businesses cannot borrow to expand, they cannot employ people. They cannot support clusters of other small businesses. And then you're in a serious conundrum. So I think there's a strategic choice that has to be made by the government to say, okay, we're going to take the risk. I understand that they are trying to fight inflation, which is also a good thing, but they have to take the strategic risk to say, okay, we will have to drive the growth of businesses and soak up the pressure of inflation for a little while so that we can create jobs and then absorb the amount of unemployed people on the street. So when you do that, then you can probably decide to fight inflation much later. So, but now, it doesn't look like inflation is even going down, and yet poverty is worsening. So it's double jeopardy for us. So there has to be a deliberate decision by the government to inject certain kinds of stimulus, and for me particularly is to encourage businesses to thrive. And I'm glad that the government has signed the finance bill, which is reducing corporate taxes for certain organizations, which is going to reduce taxes for organizations that are earning below 100 million revenue. Those might help businesses expand, but more needs to be done.
This discussion will certainly continue. Let's see how things roll ahead. Ayodele Adio, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, all right, we have in the studio the managing editor, the Avalon Daily, Ayodele Adio. It's nice to have you join us right now.
Thank you.
Great. Now, we have, before now, in the last administration of governance in Nigeria, had the SURE P, which was an intervention scheme to suck up, unemployed youths into the system. And then after that, we have right now the NPower, which is, a part of the social investment program on youth, also to suck up about 500,000 youths from the streets. How far do schemes like this go when it comes to reducing the number of unemployed?
You already started having problems with the NPower scheme. People are complaining of not being paid. And that goes back to my argument of sustainability that I made earlier on, and the discipline to follow through. So I mean, we're already in a terrible situation. And before we can, because first of all, for us to reduce unemployment and poverty rate by at least 50%, we need to grow to grow our GDP by 10% for at least the next decade. Now, before we do that, I think there are a couple of low-hanging fruits that we can quickly milk. And some of them I'd like to share, one of which, for instance, is food processing and standards of agricultural food products. So take, for instance, beef slaughterhouses and beef processing companies in America alone employs 500,000 people who earn above the minimum wage. Now, if you look at Brazil, one beef company in Brazil, the JPS, employs, I think, about 900,000 people globally and has a revenue of $50 billion US. Brazil alone as a country makes about $7.4 billion exporting beef. And then you have all these cows running around Nigeria, for instance. So I think food processing creates a huge opportunity for Nigerians to get gainfully employed. Of course, real estate, there's 17 million housing deficit in Nigeria. This is a 2011-2012 quote. I'm sure the deficit has widened. A huge investment in that sector puts people into work, skilled and unskilled labor, who will be grossly, absorbed into this sector. I mean, take for instance the clothing industry. Bangladesh has about 4,500 factories employing 3 million people in their garment factories. We all wear Nigerian clothes these days. It's popular. I'm wearing one. I'm sure her dress is made by a local designer. Now, our ability
I'm wearing a suit, but it's made in Nigeria.
Nigeria, exactly. So our ability to train and train people in these skills and improve those skills and invest in that sector will create huge opportunities. So, and I think it's also important because more than half of the states in Nigeria do not have credible and competent state Bureau of Statistics that measure progress now and data. What you can't measure, you can't grow. So it's important for state government to
But you know how we do when it comes to issues of data, but that's aside now. The others have said that the education sector could also help in dealing with these issues of unemployment, especially with revitalizing existing curriculum such that you build a capacity for youth to have the mindset of creating jobs for themselves.
I mean, education is critical, and sometimes I think we focus so much on the fact that education to train people to create jobs for themselves. Not everybody is going to be an entrepreneur. A lot of people cannot be entrepreneurs. They just want to get a decent job, a decent 9-to-5, or have a competent skill, to earn a living. And education is not necessarily BSc degrees or MSc degrees. Definitely. Important vocational skills can be considered education. In fact, I mean, jokingly, there are 70,000 farmers in Kebbi haven't been able to pay their loans. They've been taken to court. Now, you can see an educational gap there. You spend billions of naira to help local rice farmers and have not necessarily transferred adequate skills to these farmers in terms of farming methods and, of course, in terms of managing resources and the financial end of their business. So you throw money at it and bind them to the Philistines, and at the end of the day, you're going to sue these same people to court for not being able to. So education is important. We need, for instance, a lot of thinking in our agricultural sector, led by the Ivory Towers, to provide solutions on how we can provide better farming seeds, better farming products.
Because all of that. After all, we have universities of agriculture in this country.
Exactly.
We have research institutes of all kinds. In fact, in everything we have research institutes. It's all right. Ayodele Adio, thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you
very much.
Well, we have in the studio managing editor, the Avalon Daily, Ayodele Adio. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Nice to have you.
Now, Nigeria is said to be sitting on a keg of gunpowder with regards to unemployment, and questions have arisen as to what proactive policies and measures that all tiers of government can take would be to address this issue.
Again, I think there are a gamut of opportunities and steps that we can take to mitigate this action. Your report was from Kano State. Yeah. Which has, one of the highest rates, numbers of poor people in the country. And shockingly, Kano used to be a serious commercial hub, and it used to be the corridor, for the trading corridor for the Sahel region. you know, way back. It had lots of factories, and you go to Sharada today, and those factories are like graveyards in Bombay and what have you, which is a sad reality. So I think, first of all, there needs to be the determination from government at all levels to deal with poverty, to see it as not just graphs on a PowerPoint presentation, but about human lives of people unable to feed themselves and their families, and to take it as a national security emergency to create jobs for these people. And I give you a typical example why it's a national security emergency. Many people do not know that Sambisa used to be a recreational park, same as the Ruga, which connects Katsina, Kaduna, and Zamfara. Now, you have abandoned these two recreational parks, and what have they turned to? Corridors for bandits and criminals. And that tells you the link between a lack of opportunities, unemployment, and security. So what the government needs to do now is to find a way, amongst many other things. I think one of the easiest things to do is to attract foreign investments. I mean, there's a huge tomato factory that's just setting up in Kaduna that will be employing thousands of people. They've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in that factory, and it will create thousands of jobs. Now, we need to attract those investments. The question is, how do we attract those investments? One, we must invest in critical infrastructure. A situation where you cannot move goods and services in record time from one point, from the production point to the market, is a huge challenge in Nigeria, and we need to fix that. And so what government needs to do is to prioritize the economic corridors in this country and link them by rails or standard express roads. And until we do that, it will be difficult for you as a logistics manager to plan the movement of goods and services. Aside that, we need to fix certain other critical infrastructure like power. The reason why Ethiopia is growing at over 6% in the last 5, 6, 7 years is largely because they have found a clever way of setting up industrial clusters where they power certain locations and provide infrastructure in those places where huge foreign companies have come to set up factories in those areas. So what we need to do is to look for such clusters in Nigeria where we can provide low rate power, power at low cost, in those clusters and infrastructure for foreign direct investors to come in, set up factories rather than go to Ghana. It's a shame that factories are relocating to Accra while we consistently lose jobs. And it's happening because there's a lack of infrastructure. The security situation is getting worse. When the major expressway into the capital of a country has become a den of thieves and criminals, is the number one turnoff for any foreign direct investor. So what we need to do is to attract foreign direct investment, like I said, among several other things. Big factories that can absorb thousands of people, not in the service sector, because service sector employs very few people. People that make and produce things like the tomato factory.
Contributing to a chain.
To contribute to a chain, a value chain that will also help cluster small businesses across. That needs to happen, and it needs to happen quick, otherwise we're sitting on a time bomb.
All right, Ayodele Adio. We'll leave it here now. Thank you for your time.
Thank
Until
you.
we see breakfast.